The problem, June Cavell decided on day one of what she would privately call the Great Royal Idiocy, was not that the king was unfunny. The problem was that he was, to her profound and secret horror, hilarious. The man was a weapon of mass comedic destruction, and she was ground zero. Her face, however, remained a mask of polished nothing. It was a skill she'd built out of necessity, not discipline, not professionalism, but survival. She had been 11 years old when the Ashwood Raiders came to her village. It was a border settlement, the kind of place the Crown's maps showed, but the Crown's soldiers rarely visited. Her mother had owned the only bookshop. Her father had been gone since before June could remember. Dead, her mother said, though she never elaborated. And June had learned young not to press on doors that stayed shut. The raid lasted 40 minutes. June remembered the number because she'd been staring at the clock on the bookshop wall when the first window shattered, and she was still staring at it, from under the counter where her mother had shoved her, when the screaming stopped. 40 minutes. Her mother had stepped in front of a raider's blade to buy June those 40 minutes. Her mother's voice, steady and calm even at the end. "Don't make a sound, little moon. Not a sound." So June hadn't. She'd pressed her face into the floorboards and bitten her own arm until she tasted copper, and she hadn't made a sound. Not when the raiders searched the shop, not when they kicked over shelves 3 feet from her hiding spot, not when they left and the silence was worse than the noise. A traveling merchant found her 2 days later. She hadn't cried. She hadn't spoken. A retired soldier at the refugee shelter named Harlan, missing 2 fingers on his left hand, a scar from temple to jaw, was the first person who didn't try to make June talk, or cry, or process her feelings. Instead, he taught her how to throw a knife, then how to take one away from someone, then how to read a room the way a hawk reads a field, every exit, every weapon, every person who might become a threat. "You've already learned the hardest part," Harlan told her when she was 15, pinning him for the 3rd time in a sparring match. "You learned to be invisible. Now I'm teaching you to be dangerous while invisible. That's a combination most soldiers never master." By 18, she was better than most soldiers. She was recruited into the royal household's shadow detail at 20, a unit so classified that even the regular palace guards didn't know it existed. 3 operatives embedded as staff, a lady-in-waiting, a gardener, a kitchen boy. Their job was to be the last line nobody saw coming. June had been assigned to the king's inner chambers rotation. She folded his laundry. She arranged flowers in the throne room. She carried tea trays and message scrolls and looked utterly, boringly unremarkable. And every second of every shift, she was tracking sightlines, cataloging who stood too close, noting which courtier's hand lingered near their hip where a short blade could hide. She was invisible. She was dangerous. And she had not genuinely smiled in 12 years. The muscles had simply atrophied, not from discipline, from a girl under a counter who learned that silence kept you alive. King Arthur Wolfhart didn't know any of this, not yet. What he knew, 6 months before the bet was even a thought in his mind, was that the woman who brought him his morning tea had the most extraordinary eyes he had ever seen, and that he was paying far too much attention to a 30-second interaction that she probably didn't think about at all. It started, though Arthur would only recognize this much later, on a Tuesday in late autumn. He was in his private study at 7 in the morning, which was unusual. Arthur was many things: a capable ruler, a passable strategist, a man whose jokes were criminally underappreciated. But he was not, by nature, a morning person. Left to his own devices, he'd start the day closer to 9, after the sun had proven its commitment to actually rising. But the trade summit with the Northern Pax was in 3 days, and Leo had left a stack of briefings on his desk the night before with a note that read, "Read these before the morning session, or I will describe, in detail, how tariff allocation works. You will not enjoy it." Arthur had taken this as the credible threat it was and dragged himself out of bed an hour early. He was halfway through a deeply boring analysis of timber exports when the door opened and she walked in. He'd seen her before, of course. She'd been on the tea rotation for months. a quiet, composed woman in a plain gray dress. But this particular Tuesday, he happened to look up at the exact moment she was crossing the room, and the early morning light from the east window caught her at an angle, and he noticed her eyes. They were gray. Not the flat, dull gray of stone, but a deep, shifting gray, like clouds before a storm. And they were moving. Not in the vague, unfocused way of someone daydreaming through a task. They were tracking. Her gaze swept the room in a pattern: window, door, desk, corners. So quick and practiced that if he'd blinked, he'd have missed it. It was the way a hawk watches a field. The way a soldier clears a room. Over the following weeks, he catalogued. She always positioned herself between him and the nearest window. Her route adjusted if a door was ajar that was usually closed. She never turned her back to both exits simultaneously. Her hands, when they weren't carrying the tray, were always free, never in pockets, never clasped, always ready. She was protecting him. Every single morning, she walked into his study and conducted a threat assessment so smooth and invisible that he'd missed it for months. And she did it while carrying a teapot without spilling a drop. Arthur was fascinated. It wasn't just the tactical precision, it was the contrast. Because underneath the operational awareness, there was no other word for it, sad. Not dramatically sad, a quieter thing, a stillness that went deeper than professionalism. Her face never changed, not a flicker of warmth, not a twitch of humor. She moved through the world like someone who had decided long ago that existing was enough and that anything more was too dangerous. He started testing it, small experiments. He'd make a dry comment to Leo when she was in the room, something offhand, and watch her from the corner of his eye. Nothing. A fortress. But then, on a morning in late winter, Leo informed him that the Ice Fang Pack's ambassador had sent, for the third time, a formal complaint about the temperature of his guest quarters. "The man is from the Ice Fang Pack," Arthur said, bewildered. "His homeland is literally a glacier. How is our palace too cold?" "He says the draft in his chamber is insulting to his heritage," Leo read from the letter, deadpan. "A draft is insulting to his heritage? What does he want me to do? Personally insulate his walls? Should I knit him a blanket? Would that be a diplomatic gesture or a declaration of war?" Knowing Ambassador Torrin, he'd find a way to be offended by the stitch pattern. And there it was. From the corner of his eye, Arthur caught it. The tiniest flicker in her expression. Not a smile, not even close, but a softening around the eyes, a fractional relaxation of the muscles around her mouth. It was there for less than a second before the fortress sealed shut again, but it was real. Something warm and reckless bloomed in his chest. She's in there. After that, the mornings changed. Arthur started waking up at 7 without an alarm. He told himself it was discipline, a new commitment to early productivity. Leo, who had known him since childhood, said nothing, but started leaving the briefings on his desk a full hour earlier, a wordless acknowledgement that whatever was getting the king out of bed, he wasn't going to question it. He noticed other things. She took her tea without sugar. She read during her breaks. He'd spotted a book tucked into the pocket of her dress, the spine cracked from use, the title worn away. She had a small scar on the back of her left hand, a thin white line that ran from her knuckle to her wrist. A defensive wound, old, from a blade. "Arthur," Leo said one afternoon, after the king had asked him to repeat the same question twice, "what is the matter with you?" "I'm not distracted. I'm contemplative." "You're staring at the wall with the expression of a man composing a sonnet. It's alarming." "I don't write sonnets." "No, you write terrible jokes in a leather notebook you think I don't know about." Arthur had the grace to look caught. "How do you know about the notebook?" "You left it on the breakfast table. I read 3 pages. I need you to know that, what do you call a wolf who does magic? A labracadabrador is not, by any known standard, comedy." That's in development. You're reading a rough draft. Arthur. Leo set his pen down and folded his hands with the patience of a man conducting an intervention. Who is the notebook for? Silence. Arthur picked up a quill, put it down, picked it up again. No one. The notebook is filled with jokes specifically designed to appeal to someone with a dry sense of humor and an appreciation for absurdist wordplay. That is not no one. That is a very specific someone. Who? Arthur didn't answer for a long moment. Then, quietly, the tea woman, Cavil. Leo's expression shifted through several phases: surprise, concern, and a weary kind of recognition, like a man watching a weather pattern he's seen before. The lady in waiting. She watches the room like a soldier, Leo. She has a defensive scar on her left hand, and she reads during her breaks, and she takes her tea without sugar, and she is the saddest person I have ever seen. And I think she might be brilliant and funny and alive under all that stillness. And no one has tried to reach her in a very long time. Leo was quiet. You've been watching her for months. Yes. You like her? Arthur set the quill down. I think about her during council meetings, Leo. I wake up an hour early to see her bring tea. I am writing a joke notebook. He paused. So yes, I think like is an understatement. And I think I'm in serious trouble. Leo looked at him, really looked, and saw something he hadn't seen in his king's eyes in a long time: earnestness. She's not what she seems, Leo said. You should know that before you go any further. I know she's more than a lady in waiting. She's shadow detail, isn't she? Leo's expression suggested he wanted to bang his head on the desk. I can neither confirm nor deny she is. That's brilliant. That's why she never smiles. She's maintaining cover. Arthur, even if, hypothetically, certain members of staff had additional responsibilities, it would be profoundly inadvisable for the king to, oh, relax, I'm not going to blow her cover. I'm going to make her laugh. The silence that followed had a specific quality. It was the silence of a man watching a beloved but deeply stupid dog run full speed toward a glass door. No, Leo said. Yes, Arthur said, she is, hypothetically, a trained professional whose entire function depends on being unremarkable. Who said anything about the court? I'm not a barbarian, Leo. I wouldn't do that to her. I mean here, in private, just us. And what possible purpose would this serve? Arthur's expression was stripped of its usual playfulness. I've been watching her for 6 months, Leo. 6 months of 30-second interactions where I catch half-second glimpses of who she actually is before the door shuts again. The bet is an excuse. I know it's an excuse. She'll know it's an excuse. But it gives us both a framework, something structured, something she can control, something she can walk away from at any point. It's the only way I can think of to say, I see you, and I'd like to know you, without it being a king giving an order. Leo was quiet for a long time. The dinner, if you win, that's the real ask. Just dinner, just talking. No expectations, no obligations. And the month of leave if she wins? She deserves it regardless. I've seen her shift schedule. She works too much. Leo sighed, a deep, defeated sigh that carried the weight of 15 years of managing a king who was, at his core, an incurable romantic disguised as a comedian. I want a raise. Denied, but you can pick the wine for the council dinner. I already picked the wine for the council dinner. Then the system works. Now, 90 days, starting tomorrow morning. The proposition happened the next morning during the tea delivery. June entered the study at 7 sharp. Tray, desk, tea on the left, biscuits on the right, briefing centered. She was reaching for the door handle when Arthur spoke. Guard Cavil. She stopped. Her hand remained on the handle. She did not turn around. A cold wire of alertness pulled taut inside her. He'd said guard, not lady or miss. Her cover designation was Ladies Attendant Cavil, No one outside the shadow detail called her guard. "You may turn around," Arthur said mildly. "I promise the conversation won't be dangerous." "Probably." She turned. Her face was the usual, blank, composed, giving nothing. Arthur was sitting behind his desk, his morning tea untouched. Leo stood by the window, wearing the expression of a man who has already mentally drafted his letter of resignation. "I know what you are," Arthur said. Simple, direct. "I've known for about 2 weeks. Your position is not in jeopardy. Your cover is intact with the court. This conversation doesn't leave this room." June said nothing. "You don't have to confirm anything, but I do have a question, a personal one, and I need you to know, genuinely, that you can say no and walk out that door and nothing changes. Not your post, not your duties, not how I treat you. You have my word." A pause. June inclined her head a fraction. "Go ahead." "I would like to make you laugh." Another pause. This one was longer. "I don't mean right now. I mean as a project. An ongoing, probably embarrassing project. I've noticed, over the last several months, that you don't smile. Ever. And before you think this is some arrogant alpha who's decided to fix a woman who doesn't need fixing, it's not that." He paused, and something genuine surfaced in his expression. "I just think you might have forgotten that it's allowed. And I'd like to remind you, if you'll let me." Leo made a sound that suggested strenuous disagreement. "So here's what I'm proposing. 90 days. During our morning routine, just here, just the three of us, I get to try. Jokes, bits, whatever I can come up with. If I get a genuine laugh out of you, you agree to have dinner with me. Not a royal dinner, just food and conversation. If I fail, you get a month of paid leave. Anywhere, Crown's expense." June stared at him. Behind her composed face, several things were happening simultaneously. First, a threat assessment, which came back green. His body language was open and slightly nervous. Leo's presence as a witness was deliberate. Second, a tactical analysis. A month of paid leave was extraordinarily generous, and the cost of losing was a dinner she could leave at any time. Third, and most troubling, a small, buried feeling she couldn't quite name. He had said several months. He'd been watching her for several months. Not as a king examining a subject, but as a person trying to see another person. The realization was like a pebble dropped into still water, small, but the ripples went deep. "I accept the terms, Your Majesty," she said, her voice flat and precise. "But I have a condition. This stays in this room. No audiences, no courtiers, and if at any point I say stop, it stops." "Absolutely," Arthur said. "Then we have an agreement. You should know that I haven't laughed in 12 years. The odds are not in your favor." Arthur's grin could have powered every lantern in the palace. "Guard Cavil, I once convinced the Ice Fang Pack ambassador that our kingdom's chief export was artisanal cheese. The odds are never in my favor. That's what makes it fun." June turned and left. Behind her, she heard Leo's voice, dry as bone. "You are going to regret this." And Arthur's, bright and sure. "Oh, absolutely. But what a way to go." The first week was, June had to admit, amateur hour. Arthur had decided that the foundation of all comedy was the pun. Each morning, after she set down his tea, he would lean back in his chair, steeple his fingers with theatrical gravity, and deliver his offering. The puns were terrible. Catastrophically, heroically terrible. Wolf-related wordplay that violated every known standard of comedy. Leo, present for every attempt, kept a tally on a scrap of parchment. By day 3, it read, "Days without a good joke, 3. He had crossed out a previous number. It had been 1. But on day 5, Arthur was workshopping. He had acquired a small leather notebook. "My joke journal," he informed her, with no apparent shame, and was testing variations. Okay, how about this? Why don't werewolves ever win at poker? Too many tells. Because of the ears. He made a vague gesture at his own ears. Leo put his face in his hands. No good? What about, what's a wolf's favorite instrument? The harmonica. June set down the tea tray with her usual precision. She looked him directly in the eye. Her face was a desert, vast, flat, and completely without life. Those aren't even structurally sound, Leo muttered into his palms. A tell in poker is a behavioral cue, not an ear. And it's harmonica. The pun doesn't even... You've just jammed howl into a word and hoped for the best. Comedy is subjective, Leo. Comedy requires a functioning joke, Arthur. June left the study. In the corridor, safely out of sight, she pressed her back against the wall and clamped her jaw shut so hard her teeth ached. The harmonica. The harmonica. It was the worst pun she had ever heard in her entire life, and the fact that he'd said it with the confidence of a man delivering a keynote address was making her chest do something she didn't trust. She breathed. She deployed a coping mechanism she'd invented at age 13, reciting, in exacting detail, the anatomical names of every bone in the human body, starting from the feet. Left distal phalanx of the fifth toe. Left middle phalanx of the fifth toe. By the time she reached the left cuboid, the crisis had passed. Her fellow shadow operative Zara, who was embedded as a gardener and therefore spent most of her days strategically pruning hedges near windows, found her during their covert midday check-in behind the stables. The king told you a joke again, didn't he? Several. Were they bad? They were an atrocity against language. Zara's eyes narrowed. You're fighting it. There's a muscle in your jaw that only does that thing when you're suppressing something. I'm suppressing the urge to request a transfer. Liar, you like him. He is my assignment. I don't like or dislike my assignments. Right, and I'm just a gardener who really loves petunias. How bad are we talking? Scale of 1 to 10. June considered. He said, harmonica. Zara stared at her. Then she turned away, her shoulders shaking, and walked directly into the hedge she'd been pruning. She stayed in the hedge for some time. Week 2 introduced what June would later refer to, in the privacy of her own mind, as the physical comedy era. It began on day 8. June entered the study to find Arthur standing in front of his desk with 3 oranges from the breakfast tray. Watch this, he told June, who had just set down the tea. I've been practicing. He has been practicing, Leo confirmed grimly. In his bedchamber. I can hear the oranges hitting the floor through the wall. It averages once every 9 seconds. Arthur shot Leo a look of betrayal, then began. He tossed the first orange up. Then the second. For one glorious, suspended moment, 2 oranges were arcing through the air in something approximating a pattern. He reached for the third. The third orange, perhaps sensing the futility of the enterprise, rolled off the desk before he could grab it. Arthur lunged for it, which meant his attention left the 2 airborne oranges, which came down in rapid succession. One hit the desk with a wet thud. The other landed directly in Leo's teacup with a spectacular splash. Leo looked down at the orange now sitting in his tea, displacing a significant volume of liquid onto his paperwork. He looked up at Arthur. His expression was one of a man who has reached a profound spiritual crossroads. I'm deducting the cost of this correspondence from your entertainment budget, Leo said, very quietly. Arthur, still bent over the desk grasping for the escaped third orange, straightened up. His hair was disheveled. There was a spot of tea on his forehead from the splash. Did you see the first 2, though? Those were good. That was technique. Those were gravity, Arthur. Gravity is not a technique. June's fingers tightened on the tray she was holding. Her thumbnails dug into the wood. She was fine. The tea on his forehead, the orange in Leo's cup, the absolute, undimmed confidence. She was fine. I'm going to try again, Arthur announced, recovering the oranges. Please don't, Leo said. I'm going to try again with 4. In what universe? Give me your orange. It's in my tea, Arthur. It's a tea orange now. It belongs to the tea. Leo, it's covered in Earl Grey. Give me the orange, Leo. June left while they were still arguing. She made it to the linen closet before she had to stop walking. She stood among the folded sheets and pressed her forehead against a shelf and breathed and breathed and breathed. The orange. In the tea. Leo's face. The tea orange. But she thought about her mother's bookshop and the smell of old paper and the clock on the wall, and the urge to laugh died, as it always did, smothered by something older and heavier. She straightened up, smoothed her dress, and went back to work. Day 12 escalated matters. June entered the study to find Arthur standing in front of his desk with a deck of playing cards. "Guard Cavil," he said, his voice dripping with manufactured mystique. "I have been studying the art of prestidigitation." "Card tricks," Leo translated from his chair, not looking up from his paperwork. "The art," Arthur repeated firmly, "of prestidigitation." He fanned the cards with a flourish that sent 3 of them fluttering to the floor. He ignored this. "Pick a card." June set the tea tray down. She looked at the fanned cards, then at Arthur, then at Leo. Leo shook his head almost imperceptibly, a man who had already seen 3 rehearsals and lost the will to intervene. "I will pick for you," Arthur said, interpreting her silence as participatory. He pulled a card from the middle with exaggerated care, glanced at it, and held it up. The Queen of Hearts. "Is this your card?" "I did not pick a card, Your Majesty." "No, but it should have been. Watch this. I'm going to make it disappear." He attempted to slide the card up his sleeve. The card caught on his cuff and bent at a right angle. He tried to force it. The sleeve of his tunic made a tearing sound. Arthur froze, looked down at his now ripped sleeve, looked at the mangled card, and then looked at June with an expression of such baffled betrayal, as if the card and the sleeve had conspired against him, that she had to deploy her bone-naming coping mechanism at emergency speed. "That," Leo said into the silence, "was the worst card trick ever performed in the history of this kingdom. And I am including the time Lord Ashford tried to do one while drunk at the harvest ball and set fire to the tablecloth." "The card was defective," Arthur said with dignity, examining his torn sleeve. "The card was a standard playing card, Arthur. They don't have defects. This one had an attitude." June left the study and made it to the servants' staircase before she had to stop walking. The look on his face when the sleeve ripped, the sheer indignant confusion of a man who had been personally wronged by a piece of paper, was assaulting her composure from the inside. Day 18 brought a new phase. Arthur arrived in the study wearing Leo's reading spectacles, which were far too small for his face, perched on the very tip of his nose. He conducted the entire morning briefing as a character he called Professor von Wolfsington, an elderly academic who kept losing his train of thought and going off on tangents about cheese. "Now, the trade deficit with the northern packs. Excuse me, this reminds me. Did you know that the Frostmere wolves make a cheese so potent it was actually classified as a weapon by the previous king? True story. Anyway, the trade deficit. Oh dear, where was I? Leo, where was I?" "You were never anywhere," Leo said. "You've been nowhere this entire time." Right, the cheese weapon. So the previous king..." Leo stood up. "I am going to get actual coffee from the actual kitchen and pretend this is not happening." He walked out. Arthur watched him go, then turned to June, still in character, peering at her over the tiny spectacles. "He lacks academic rigor. Now, where were we?" "You were discussing a cheese weapon, Your Majesty." Both of them went still. June because she had spoken, voluntarily, unscripted, outside of protocol. Arthur because she had responded to the bit. A small, delighted smile flickered across Arthur's face. "She speaks! The professor is honored." He adjusted the spectacles, which were slowly sliding down his nose. "Now, Guard Cavil, Your thoughts on the military applications of aged Gouda." She said nothing more, but something had shifted. A brick in the wall had wiggled, just slightly. Day 24 brought what June considered the single most dangerous bit yet. Arthur produced, from somewhere no one wanted to examine too closely, a hand puppet made from a brown wool sock. It had button eyes, yarn hair, and a lopsided mouth drawn in ink. He called it Lord Chancellor Socksworth. He sat behind his desk with Socksworth on his right hand and proceeded to have a full policy debate with the puppet about whether the kingdom should invest in improved road infrastructure. "I think the eastern roads are a priority," Arthur said in his normal voice. "Nonsense," squeaked Socksworth, wobbling emphatically. "The eastern wolves can walk. They have 4 legs. Invest in more biscuits." "Socksworth, you can't solve every problem with biscuits." "Name one problem that biscuits don't solve." Arthur paused, considering. "War." "Biscuit diplomacy. You show up to the enemy's camp with a tin of shortbread and say, 'Can we talk about this?' No one attacks a man with shortbread, Arthur. It's uncivilized." Leo, who had walked in mid-debate, stood in the doorway holding a stack of scrolls. He stared at the puppet. He stared at Arthur. He set the scrolls on a side table, turned around, and walked back out. 5 seconds later, his voice drifted back from the corridor. "I want it known that I am taking a personal day." June, standing by the door with her hands clasped in front of her, was in agony. Not the visible kind. Externally, she was a marble statue with excellent posture. Internally, she was on fire. Lord Chancellor Socksworth. Biscuit diplomacy. No one attacks a man with shortbread. Her ribs ached from the effort of containment. And then Arthur, still wearing the puppet, turned to June and said in Socksworth's voice, "Tough crowd. Would a biscuit help?" June said nothing, but her jaw ached from the effort. No one attacks a man with shortbread. She was going to need every bone in both feet to survive this one. The thing that was making this so much harder than it should have been, harder than anything Harlan had trained her for, was that Arthur wasn't performing. Or rather, he was performing, but he wasn't acting. The man behind the jokes was the same man who governed the kingdom. He led by making people comfortable. He diffused tension with absurdity. He made Leo laugh against his will at least once a day, and June had seen the way Leo's shoulders would drop afterward, the tension bleeding out of him. Arthur's humor was a gift he gave to the people around him, and the only person who wouldn't accept it was her. It wasn't that she didn't want to. The wanting was the problem. Every joke was a hand extended in the dark, and she wanted so badly to take it. But the last time she'd reached for something warm, it had been her mother's hand, and then it was gone, and she'd learned to live in the cold, because at least the cold couldn't be taken away. Day 40 brought the Meyerwood incident. Arthur was behind his desk, Leo in his usual chair. Arthur had his feet up on the desk and was wearing the particular expression June had come to recognize as the preamble to a story. Barely suppressed glee, like a child who knows where the birthday presents are hidden. "Leo, do you remember the Meyerwood delegation?" Leo's pen stopped. He didn't look up, but his entire body went rigid. "No." "You do. You absolutely do. Alpha Fenris and his wife, Marin, state dinner, 3 years ago." "I have no recollection of this event." "Leo, you drafted the formal apology. It was 4 pages long." Arthur turned to June. "He remembers. He's just hoping that if he denies it hard enough, the universe will retroactively unhappen it." He settled back in his chair. "So, the Meyerwood pack. Very traditional, very proud, very serious about protocol. Alpha Fenris is 7 feet tall and has a handshake that could crush a horse. His wife, Marin, is equally terrifying, warrior-born. Once killed a mountain lion with her bare hands. Lovely woman." "Don't," Leo said quietly. The state dinner was going beautifully. 3 courses, no incidents. Leo was actually smiling. It was a miracle. "It was the last time I smiled," Leo muttered. Then, during dessert, Marin came over to pay her respects. She was in human form, important detail, wearing a formal gown, very elegant, and she had this absolutely magnificent fur stole draped over her shoulders. Silver and white, very thick, clearly valuable. Arthur paused for dramatic effect. So I complimented her on it. "Lady Marin," I said, "what a magnificent pelt, the finest I've ever seen. Wherever did you get it?" Leo put his face in both hands. And there was this silence, this very specific silence. The silence of 30 people at a dinner table all realizing the same thing at the same time. June's hand, resting on the tea tray, tightened imperceptibly. Because the fur stole was not a fur stole. It was her. It was Marin's actual pelt, her wolf's fur. It grows along her shoulders in human form, a rare trait in old bloodline wolves. I had just complimented an alpha warrior on her body hair, June, at a state dinner, in front of her husband, who could crush a horse with his hand. Leo's voice emerged from behind his hands. Fenris stood up so fast he knocked over a candelabra. He did. 6 candles, a tablecloth fire, and a very rapid intervention by the serving staff. Meanwhile, Marin is just staring at me. And I, in my infinite wisdom, attempted to recover by saying, and I quote, "I mean, it's very lush." "Lush," Leo repeated, his voice hollow. "Lush." I said lush, to describe a woman's body hair. At a diplomatic dinner, Leo had to physically escort me from the table. I told him he had urgent correspondence, Leo said. The urgent correspondence was a 4-page apology I made him write by hand. 3 drafts. He misspelled regrettable twice. It's a hard word when you're panicking, Leo. It has 1 T, Arthur. 1. June was in trouble. The story was devastating on its own, but the escalation, the candelabra, the tablecloth fire, the word lush delivered with the confidence of a man making things worse at maximum speed, was pushing her toward dangerous territory. She thought about the scapula, the acromion process, the glenoid cavity. She held. "The best part," Arthur said, grinning, "is that Fenris and I are actually good friends now. He brings it up at every diplomatic meeting. Every single one. Last time he introduced me to a visiting dignitary as Arthur Wolfhart, king of the 5 packs and noted fur enthusiast." Leo made a sound like a man who has been struck. "Noted fur enthusiast," Arthur repeated, savoring each word. June left the study. In the corridor, she pressed her back against the wall and breathed through what was rapidly becoming the most dangerous 30 seconds of her professional career. Noted. Fur. Enthusiast. She clenched her jaw so hard her teeth ached. Zara found her there, still pressed against the wall, eyes shut. How bad? Noted fur enthusiast. Zara blinked. Then she turned, walked to the nearest window, opened it, stuck her head out into the courtyard, and laughed into the open air for 15 seconds straight. She pulled her head back in, closed the window, smoothed her gardener's apron, and turned back to June with streaming eyes. "I'm fine." "You just laughed out a window." It was a controlled release, very professional. Day 45 was worse. Arthur arrived in the study with a specific energy that June had learned to dread. The energy of a man who had decided that the most humiliating chapter of his life was actually comedy gold. "I've been holding this one back," he announced. "I was saving it, but desperate times." Leo, without looking up, said, "If this is the shifting story, I'm leaving." "It's the shifting story." Leo set down his pen, picked up his tea, and started for the door. "Leo, sit down. You weren't even there for this one." I read the healer's report. It was enough. But he sat back down because Leo always sat back down. It was his curse. Guard Cavil. What I am about to tell you is classified information known only to myself, Lord Leo, 3 palace healers, all sworn to secrecy, and my late mother, who is fortunately beyond the reach of gossip. Unfortunately beyond the reach of helping you, Leo added. I was 16. It was the night of the autumn equinox. There was a girl. There's always a girl, Leo sighed. Her name was Elise, daughter of the visiting beta from the Greymore pack. Red hair. Could raise one eyebrow in a way that's not relevant. The point is, I was 16, she was visiting, and I desperately wanted to impress her. By shifting, Leo said flatly. By shifting. Now, most wolves have their first full shift at 14 or 15. Big ceremony, family, the whole thing. I was a late bloomer. At 16, I still hadn't managed a complete shift. I could do partial, ears, tail, claws, but the full transformation eluded me. My mother kept telling me it would happen when I was ready. Mothers, as it turns out, are always right. He paused, building the moment. So, autumn equinox, bonfire in the courtyard. Elise is watching from the balcony. I decide, with the unshakable confidence of a 16-year-old boy, that tonight is the night. I'm going to shift, fully, in front of everyone. In front of everyone, Leo repeated, closing his eyes. I focused. I concentrated. I summoned every ounce of my wolf. And it started. My arms went first, full wolf forelegs, claws and fur, very impressive. Then my back, my shoulders, my chest. I could feel it working. I was doing it. You were not doing it, Leo said. I was doing part of it, the top part. The top part was entirely wolf, magnificent, powerful, regal wolf. He paused. The bottom part was not. June's fingers curled into her palms. I got stuck, halfway, wolf from the waist up, completely, entirely human from the waist down. Standing in the courtyard, in front of a bonfire, in front of Elise, in trousers. Leo set his tea down. The healers described it as an unprecedented partial lycanthropic arrest. They were being kind. So there I am, a wolf's head, wolf's torso, wolf's arms, attached to a pair of skinny 16-year-old human legs in formal trousers. I couldn't go forward. I couldn't go back. And my wolf was as confused as everyone else. He was trying to walk on 4 legs, but 2 of them were human legs that don't bend the right way. So I just sort of... He made a wobbling gesture with his hands, staggered around the courtyard like a very hairy centaur with a balance problem. Leo's composure cracked, a tightening around his mouth, a slight shake of his shoulders. He looked away sharply. My mother, who was the most dignified woman in the 5 kingdoms, took one look at me, turned to the 3 healers she'd already summoned, because apparently she'd predicted this exact outcome, and said, "Unstick my son. He's embarrassing the bloodline." She actually said that? June heard herself ask. Both men looked at her. She had spoken again, voluntarily, with genuine interest. Arthur's face lit up. She absolutely said that. Direct quote. The healers spent 45 minutes trying to coax the rest of the shift out of me. Calming herbs, meditation. One of them even howled at me, which was deeply unhelpful. Finally, my mother just walked up, looked me in the eye, and said, "Arthur, Elise went inside 20 minutes ago. She's not watching anymore." And, June said, she was breaking protocol so thoroughly now that she might as well have set fire to the guard's handbook, but she didn't care. And the embarrassment was so total, so complete, that my wolf just gave up. The shift reversed. I was fully human again, standing in the courtyard in torn trousers, surrounded by 3 bewildered healers and my mother, who patted me on the head and said, "There's always next equinox, dear." What happened with Elise? June asked. She married a beta from the coastal pack 2 years later. Very happy by all accounts. She sends me a card every equinox with a drawing of a wolf in trousers. She thinks she's hilarious. She is hilarious, Leo said. June was at the absolute outer edge of her control. The image, the wolf torso on human legs, staggering around a courtyard, the mother's deadpan, the card with the wolf in trousers, was a compound assault. She excused herself from the study with the mechanical precision of someone defusing a bomb. Later, behind the stables, Zara looked at her face and said, "Whatever it was, I need to know." Wolf torso, human legs, trousers. Zara's mouth opened, closed, opened again. "I need more. His mother told the healers to unstick my son. He's embarrassing the bloodline." Zara grabbed a horse blanket, pressed it over her face, and screamed into it. When she emerged, her eyes were bright and her voice was hoarse. "He's going to kill us both. Not with weapons, with stories." Day 50 was the Leo love letter, and it was the closest June came to losing before the puppy. Arthur was in a particularly good mood. He'd returned from a successful negotiation and was riding the high of competence, which manifested as an overwhelming urge to celebrate by torturing Leo. "Leo, how is Ambassador Torin?" Leo's pen scratched to a halt. "Don't." "How long has it been? 3 years since the letter?" "It was a clerical error." "It was a love letter, Leo. 4 pages. You used the word yearning twice." "It was intended for someone else." "It was intended for Marguerite, the bookseller in the lower town. You'd been courting her for 6 weeks. You wrote her a letter that, frankly, I didn't know you had in you. Your eyes are the harbor in which my restless soul finds peace. You wrote that. You, the man who once described a sunset as adequate." Leo had gone very still. His ears were turning red, a phenomenon June had catalogued but never seen at this intensity. "And then," Arthur continued, "in a moment of catastrophic administrative failure, you sealed the letter, addressed it incorrectly, and sent it via royal courier to Ambassador Torin of the Icefang Pack." "The envelopes were identical," Leo said, his voice strangled. "One was addressed to Marguerite, 14 Booksellers Lane. The other to His Excellency Ambassador Torin, Diplomatic Suite, East Wing. These are not similar addresses." "I was distracted." "You were yearning. Twice." June's jaw was clenched so hard she could feel her heartbeat in her teeth. Leo, the most composed man in the kingdom, was turning a color that could only be described as sunset over tomato. The ambassador received the letter at breakfast. He read it in full. He was deeply moved. He then sent a reply. "Don't read the reply," Leo said. "Which I happen to have here." Arthur produced from his desk drawer a piece of parchment that had clearly been folded and unfolded many times. It had the look of a relic, a holy document preserved through the ages. "You kept it?" Leo said, aghast. "My dear Lord Leo, I was most surprised and deeply touched by your correspondence. While your feelings are unexpected, I am not entirely unmoved. Your description of my eyes as a harbor was particularly affecting, though I should note that my eyes are brown, and harbors are typically blue." A sound escaped June, a small sound, the tiniest possible sound. It was not a laugh. It was more like the ghost of a laugh, the spectral remnant of a laugh that had died on its way out of her mouth. She caught it instantly, her face resetting to granite in under a second. But Arthur heard it. His eyes snapped to her, wide with hope. She stared straight ahead. Stone, wall, nothing. He turned back to the letter. "If, however, your affections are transferable, my husband's sister is currently unattached and has expressed an interest in men who write with passion. I enclose her correspondence address. Warmest regards, Ambassador Torin. P.S. You misspelled yearning. It has 1 N. "It has 2 N's, Leo said to no one in particular, his voice a whisper of destroyed dignity. "Torin sent flowers, Leo. He sent you flowers the next day. Winter roses with a card that said, 'To new beginnings.' The diplomatic team thought we were forming an alliance. I had to explain to 3 foreign ambassadors that my beta was not engaged to the Icefang Pack's representative." Leo stood up. He gathered his papers. He walked to the door with precise, measured steps. At the threshold, he stopped. I want it known that Marguerite did eventually receive the correct letter. We courted for 8 months. It was the happiest period of my life. And then she moved to the southern provinces, and it ended. And I have not written a letter of that nature since." He paused. "And my spelling of yearning was correct. It does have 2 N's. He left. Arthur and June stood in the silence. After a moment, Arthur said, quietly and without any of the comedic energy of the preceding minutes, "He's right, actually. It does have 2 N's. Torn was wrong." He looked at the letter, then carefully folded it and put it back in the drawer. I shouldn't have read the reply. The story's funny, but the letter was real. And Leo's the best man I know. It was the first time she'd seen him check himself. He'd gotten the biggest reaction he'd ever gotten from her, that tiny involuntary sound. And instead of pressing the advantage, he'd pulled back. For Leo. She respected that more than any joke he'd ever told. "Arthur," she said. He looked up, surprised. "For the record, yearning has 2 N's. A slow grin spread across his face. "You're keeping score." "I am doing nothing of the sort." She picked up the tea tray. "Good morning, Your Majesty." She left the study. Behind her, she heard Arthur say, to the empty room, "She's keeping score." And June was keeping score. Not out loud, never out loud. But in the quiet of her quarters at night, she would replay the day's material. The Meyerwood Pelt story, 7 out of 10, excellent setup. Bonus point for noted fur enthusiast. The shifting disaster, 9 out of 10, perfect escalation. The mother's deadpan was the kill shot. The Leo love letter, 10 out of 10, flawless. The only joke she'd given an audible reaction to, and the moment he'd pulled back for Leo's sake, had elevated it from comedy to something she didn't have a word for. Day 68 changed everything. Not because of anything Arthur did, but because of Duke Morgrath of the Blackstone Pack, a man who understood power only as a weapon and saw kindness as a crack to exploit. Morgrath had been angling for Arthur's throne for years, not openly, but through the slow work of undermining. He questioned Arthur's decisions in interpack councils. He whispered that a king who told jokes was a king who couldn't be taken seriously. The problem was that it wasn't working. Arthur's court was stable, his people prosperous. The jokes and warmth, the things Morgrath saw as weakness, were exactly what made Arthur's rule unshakable. So Morgrath changed tactics. His spies had been feeding him reports, and the picture was tantalizing. The king was fixated on a servant, a lady-in-waiting. He visited her station, lingered in rooms where she was posted, rearranged his schedule to coincide with her shifts. Arthur Wolfhart had a weakness, and it had a name. Morgrath arrived for a diplomatic visit with a trade agreement in one hand and a test in the other. If he could provoke Arthur into an emotional display over a servant, it would prove the king could be manipulated. June was in the throne room, arranging flowers near the dais. She saw Morgrath change direction. She saw his eyes fix on her. She knew, with the cold clarity of her training, that he was coming for her. Not randomly, purposefully. He stopped beside her flower arrangement. Too close. Close enough to be invasive, not close enough to justify a scene. "So," he said, "the king's little project." June continued arranging lilies, but the part of her brain that Harlan had spent 7 years sharpening was already running. She understood instantly what this was. Morgrath wasn't targeting her. She was the tool. Arthur was the target. The Duke wanted the king to react, to snarl, to prove that a servant could make him lose composure in public. The response wasn't violence. It was control. She turned to face Morgrath directly and met his eyes. The effect was immediate. June's eyes were flat, calm, and absolutely empty of fear. The look of a woman who had assessed a threat and categorized it, and the category was manageable. "Your Grace," she said, her voice quiet and pleasant. "The lilies you're standing beside are a hybrid from the southern provinces. The pollen, unfortunately, stains terribly. It's already on your left cuff. Morgrath glanced down involuntarily. There was, in fact, a faint smudge of orange pollen on his sleeve. It won't come out, June continued. The dye bonds to wool permanently. A shame, that's very fine weave. Blackstone craftsmanship, if I'm not mistaken? She was doing two things. First, breaking his rhythm. He'd come to deliver a monologue, and she'd turned it into a conversation about laundry. Second, demonstrating to anyone watching that she was not rattled. Not a damsel, not a vulnerability to exploit. Morgrath recovered. He leaned closer, dropping his voice. You're sharper than you look, girl. I arrange flowers, Your Grace. It doesn't require much sharpness. No, but deflecting a duke does. His eyes narrowed. What are you? June picked up another lily. I'm a lady-in-waiting who's noticed you're standing in the wrong part of the hall. The Duke of Blackstone's designated position is to the left of the third pillar. Shall I escort you there? I'd hate for there to be a protocol error. It was a dismissal, wrapped in courtesy, buried under deference, but unmistakable. Morgrath stared at her. The test was failing, not because the king had reacted, but because the lever wouldn't move. He opened his mouth to try again. He didn't get the chance. Duke Morgrath, Arthur's voice came from 10 feet away. Not loud, but carrying a frequency that made every wolf in the room go still. He was off the dais, on the floor of the hall. No one had seen him move. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't angry either. He was calm. Completely, terrifyingly calm. He'd watched his operative handle it, and was now stepping in not to rescue, but to close. I see you've met one of our most attentive staff. She has an extraordinary eye for detail. He glanced at Morgrath's stained cuff. Pollen. Terrible stuff. My steward can help. He continued before Morgrath could respond. You came here for a timber agreement. An excellent deal. Leo drafted it, and Leo doesn't write bad deals. I suggest you enjoy the reception, sign the agreement, and let my household staff arrange flowers in peace. He paused, and something shifted behind his eyes, a hardness, a line being drawn. Everyone in this palace is under my protection. This is not a sentiment, it is how I govern. If you find that standard incompatible with your own, your escort will be ready within the hour. Morgrath's plan lay in ruins, and the wreckage was doubly humiliating. He'd been neutralized by a servant who'd made him look at pollen on his sleeve, and finished off by a king who'd framed the exchange as a minor breach of hospitality. There was nothing to exploit. No snarl, no possessiveness. Just a woman who'd held her ground, and a ruler who'd backed her up without making it look like he needed to. The Duke held Arthur's gaze for 4 seconds. Then he looked away and gave a stiff nod. He turned and walked away. Arthur watched him go. Then he turned to June. The steadiness in his face softened, just slightly, just for her. Not a question of, are you all right? But something closer to recognition. I saw what you did. She met his eyes and gave him the smallest nod. Not the nod of a woman who'd been rescued, the nod of a colleague. Something had shifted in the architecture of her chest. For 12 years she had operated on a single belief. She was alone. No one stood with her because no one could be trusted to stand. But Arthur hadn't tried to stand in front of her. He'd stood beside her. He'd watched her handle the threat, respected that she could, and stepped in at the exact moment his authority was what the situation needed. He hadn't made her small. He'd made them a team. That, more than any joke, was the thing that broke through. After Morgrath, something shifted in the gravity between them. Arthur's bits became gentler, more conversational. Less performance, more him. One morning he told her that Leo had put a formal complaint in his suggestion box. You have a suggestion box? June asked. I installed it last year. Leo said it was a waste of resources. He was right. No one's used it except him. He puts a complaint in it every Monday. Arthur held up a folded parchment. To His Majesty the King, it has come to my attention that you have been using the royal seal to stamp your joke notebook with the phrase, approved by the crown. This is a misuse of sovereign authority. Additionally, the jokes themselves remain unapproved by any reasonable standard. Respectfully, Lord Leo. P.S. The wax is running low because of this. Please stop. June pressed her tongue hard against the roof of her mouth. Then, on day 78, he brought her tea. Not as part of the morning routine, but during her afternoon shift, when she was stationed in the corridor outside the council chamber. He appeared with a cup and saucer, slightly out of breath, as if he'd carried it from the kitchen himself. "I know you can't drink on duty," he said, "but you could just hold it, for the warmth." She looked at the cup, then at him. He was wearing a formal tunic, clearly pulled away from something important. There was ink on his fingers. His hair was slightly disarranged. "You left a council meeting to bring me tea?" she said. "The council was discussing sewage infrastructure. Trust me, they won't notice I'm gone." "You're the king. They will absolutely notice." "Then they'll send Leo, and Leo will sigh heavily, and the natural order will be restored." He held out the cup. "Please, it's getting cold, and I look ridiculous standing in a corridor holding a teacup." She took it. Their fingers brushed. She told herself the warmth she felt was from the porcelain. "Thank you," she said. "Arthur." It was the first time she'd used his name outside the study, he noticed. His whole face changed. Surprise, then pleasure, then something so openly tender that she had to look away. "You're welcome, June." He walked away. She held the tea until it went cold, long after her shift ended. Day 88 arrived, and Arthur stopped trying. June knew the moment she entered the study. The tea tray was in place, but the room felt different, emptied of something essential. Arthur was at the window, his back to her. Leo was in his usual chair, his expression careful. "Good morning," Arthur said without turning. His voice was normal, pleasant, royal, and completely devoid of the spark she'd come to depend on without realizing it. "Good morning, Your Majesty," she said. He turned. He met her eyes, and she saw it. Defeat, carefully disguised as acceptance. "I believe our wager ends tomorrow. I want you to know that your leave has already been arranged. A month, wherever you choose." "I also want to apologize," he continued, the steadiness of his voice clearly costing him something. "I may have made your position here uncomfortable. That was never my intention. I hope you enjoy your leave." He turned back to the window, conversation over. Bet conceded. Leo caught her eye across the room. His expression said, "He's been like this since last night. He thinks you despise him." June left the study. She found Zara in the potting shed at noon. "He gave up," June said. Zara set down her pruning shears. "I know. He thinks I hate him." "Can you blame him? You gave him nothing. For 88 days. The man turned himself inside out trying to reach you, and you stood there like a wall." "I am a wall. That's the job." "No, that's what you decided to be when you were 11 years old, and the world hurt you so badly you decided never to let it see you again. You're not 11 anymore, and he's not the world. He's just a man who makes terrible jokes and brings you tea and watched you handle a duke without flinching, and then backed you up instead of trying to save you. That's not someone you need a wall for." June's throat felt tight. "If I let the wall down, I don't know how to put it back up." "Maybe you don't need to. The strongest thing I've ever seen you do was not smiling for 88 days. But the bravest thing you could do is smile on day 89. Day 89. The Great Hall was in its usual state of controlled chaos. June was at her station near the dais, arranging flowers. Her hands were steady. Inside, her heart was beating so hard she could feel it in her fingertips. She had made a decision sometime around 3 in the morning. The decision scared her more than any assassin she'd ever faced. She heard him before she saw him. A commotion at the main entrance, whispers, shuffling. She looked up. He was standing in the archway. No crown, no formal robes. A simple tunic, rumpled. His hair was a mess. His eyes were scanning the room with the frantic energy of a man who'd had a terrible idea and was committed to seeing it through before common sense could catch up. His eyes found her. He walked toward her. His hands were behind his back. He stopped 3 feet away. The court, sensing something, went quiet. Arthur brought his hands forward. He was holding a puppy. It was a tiny, impossibly fluffy wolf pup. Chocolate brown fur, oversized paws, bright blue eyes that seemed permanently startled by their own existence. On its head, tilted at a catastrophic angle, was a miniature crown made from gold foil. Around its neck, someone had tied a red velvet cape the size of a handkerchief. The cape was already half chewed. The puppy looked at June. June looked at the puppy. The puppy sneezed. The force of the sneeze knocked the foil crown over its eyes. Blind and bewildered, it pawed at its own face, overbalanced, and tumbled sideways in Arthur's hands, getting tangled in the velvet cape. Arthur held up the struggling, sneezing, cape-wrapped disaster of a puppy and said, in a voice that was trying very hard to be steady, "His Royal Highness Prince Floofington I humbly requests, on my behalf, because I have apparently run out of courage, a smile from the bravest woman in this kingdom." June stared at the puppy, which had given up fighting the cape and was now chewing on the foil crown with grim determination. She stared at Arthur, his ridiculous hair, his hopeful eyes, his ink-stained fingers wrapped carefully around a puppy he'd probably spent all night finding a crown for. She thought of 88 Days, the Howl Monica, the Tea Orange, Lord Chancellor Soxworth and biscuit diplomacy. The morning he told her about his mother. The afternoon he brought her tea in a corridor and looked at her like she was something precious. She thought of a bookshop and a clock on the wall and a woman who said, "Don't make a sound, little moon." And June realized, standing in that hall with the whole court watching, that her mother hadn't meant forever. She had meant survive. And June had survived. She had survived so completely, so ferociously, that she had forgotten to start living again. The sound, when it came, surprised her as much as anyone. It started as a tremor, a crack in the foundation. Her lips, pressed together for 12 years, trembled. Her eyes, those storm-gray eyes that never gave anything away, went bright and glassy. And then it broke through. A laugh. Not a polite laugh, not a courtly laugh. A real, full, helpless, messy, broken open laugh that tore out of her like something that had been trapped and was finally free. She laughed until her eyes spilled over. She laughed until her stomach hurt and her face ached from using muscles she'd forgotten she had. She was laughing at the puppy, at the crown, at the cape, at Arthur's face, at all of it. But mostly, she was laughing because she could, because her mother had given her the silence to survive, and this foolish, wonderful man had given her a reason to break it. The hall erupted. Zara, who had abandoned all pretense of being a gardener and was standing in the middle of the hall holding a watering can, screamed, "Yes!" at a volume that made several elderly nobles clutch their hearts. Leo, standing at the edge of the dais, allowed himself a small, private smile. He picked up the scrap of parchment where he'd been keeping his tally. He crossed out the running total and wrote a single word. Finally. Arthur hadn't moved. He was standing there, puppy in his arms, staring at June with an expression she'd never seen on anyone's face before. Pure, uncomplicated joy mixed with something so raw and reverent that she had to look away to catch her breath. "I believe," he said, his voice rough, "you owe me a dinner." June wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "I believe I do." Prince Floofington, finally free of the cape, yipped in what appeared to be agreement. The royal gardens at night were nothing like June had imagined. Under the soft glow of lanterns strung between ancient oaks, they were a different world. Night-blooming jasmine, the whisper of a fountain, 2 chairs at a small table that someone, Leo probably, had set with understated care. June felt strange without her armor, not the literal kind, the invisible kind. The posture, the blank face, the measured voice. She'd left it all in her quarters, and without it, she felt lighter and more terrified than she had in years. She was wearing a dark blue dress she'd bought 2 years ago and never worn, and she kept catching herself reaching for a weapon that wasn't there. Arthur was already there, fidgeting with his cuff. When he saw her, he stopped. For a long moment, neither spoke. "You came," he said. "You won the bet." "I know, but I was still worried you'd send the puppy instead." A small laugh, still new, still strange in her own throat. "I considered it. Floofington is better company. He chewed through 2 pairs of my boots today. His reign of terror has begun." He pulled out her chair, and the awkwardness settled between them like a third guest. "I have absolutely no idea what to say," Arthur admitted. "I spent 90 days preparing material, and now my mind is completely blank." "You could tell me another joke." "I'm terrified that if I tell a joke now, it'll be so bad it undoes the laugh and we're back to square one." "That's not how laughter works." "You don't know that. You've been out of the game for 12 years. The rules may have changed." She smiled. It still felt unfamiliar, like wearing someone else's expression, but it was getting easier. "The rules haven't changed." The food arrived, carried by servants who had been very firmly instructed by Leo to be invisible. A bottle of wine that Arthur handled with exaggerated care. Leo chose the wine. He left a note. It said, "Do not spill this. It is older than your reign and worth more than your jokes." He squinted at the label. The rest was mostly threats. Leo's very invested in this going well. They talked for hours. The food grew cold and neither noticed. Arthur told her about his mother, Queen Isolde, who read to him, who smelled like lavender, who died when he was 16. About the weight of the crown and the loneliness of the throne. "Can I ask you something?" Arthur said. "You don't have to answer." She nodded. "The 12 years. What happened?" She'd expected the question, but sitting here, with this man who had spent 3 months doing nothing but trying to give her a reason to feel joy, the rehearsed answer felt dishonest. So she told him. Not everything, not the details that lived in nightmares, but the shape of it. The bookshop, the raiders, her mother, the clock on the wall. "She sounds extraordinary," he said. "Your mother." She was. She gave me the silence. She meant it as a gift, a way to survive. I just forgot to give it back. Arthur reached across the table and took her hand. "Can I see you again? Not as a bet, not as a king and guard thing, just this." She looked at him in the lantern light, this man who had juggled oranges and argued with sock puppets, all for the impossible hope of a single laugh from a woman who'd forgotten how. He was absurd. He was wonderful. "Yes," she said, "you can see me again." His smile was so bright it could have replaced the lanterns. He lifted her hand and pressed a kiss to her knuckles, old-fashioned, gentle, entirely sincere. "Good night, June." "Good night, Arthur." He was halfway across the courtyard when he turned back. "One more thing." "What?" "What do you call an alpha king who wins a bet against impossible odds?" She felt it coming and couldn't stop it. "What?" "Lucky." She laughed, soft, surprised, helpless. And the sound didn't hurt anymore. It felt, for the first time in 12 years, like coming home. 3 months later, Guard Captain June Cavil stood in her usual position near the dais. Still in plain clothes, still a lady-in-waiting to the court. The shadow detail had been preserved, though Arthur now had the distinction of being a king who knew his own ghost operators by name and occasionally brought them snacks. The morning address was underway. Arthur was outlining a public works initiative, regal, articulate, every inch the monarch. Mid-sentence, he caught June's eye and gave her the smallest wink. Then he looked at his notes, and his expression shifted. "The aqueduct project will be funded through a temporary levy on wool exports. I understand this may feel," he paused, "like the farmers are being fleeced." Leo closed his eyes. June's lips pressed together, hard. Arthur moved on. But as he turned to gesture at a map, his foot caught the edge of the carpet. A beautifully calibrated stumble, just clumsy enough to be plausible, just theatrical enough to be deliberate. He caught himself on the throne's armrest and shot June a look of exaggerated innocence. A sound escaped her. Small, quiet, undeniably a laugh. From his cushion at the foot of the dais, Prince Floofington I, now a lanky adolescent wolf of considerable size, still wearing a slightly larger but equally lopsided foil crown, lifted his head and yipped in solidarity. Later that evening, in the garden, Arthur wrapped his arms around her from behind and rested his chin on her shoulder. The jasmine was blooming again. "You laughed," he murmured. "It was a cough. I have a very sophisticated cough versus laugh detection system. That was a laugh. 347, by the way. You are not keeping count. I am absolutely keeping count. Leo has a ledger. It's categorized. There's a column for genuine laugh, suppressed laugh, and laugh disguised as cough. The last column is the longest." She turned in his arms to face him. His golden eyes were warm in the fading light, and his smile, his real smile, the one that wasn't performing, was the thing she hadn't known she'd been looking for her entire life. "I have a confession," she said. "You've been a foreign spy this whole time. Worse. You actually like the puns. Much worse." She took a breath. "The Howl Monica joke. Day 5. I almost broke." His eyes went wide. "Day 5? It was the worst pun I had ever heard in my entire life, and you said it with the confidence of a man accepting a Lifetime Achievement Award." I had to recite every bone in the human body to hold it together. Day 5. He put both hands on her shoulders. I spent 84 more days. I juggled oranges into Leo's tea, I know. I ripped my own sleeve doing a card trick and blamed the card, I know. I argued with a sock puppet about biscuit diplomacy, I know. I told you the most humiliating story of my life involving wolf legs and trousers, I know. I read Leo's love letter out loud and... He stopped. His eyes narrowed. Wait. Day 50. The love letter. I heard a sound. A very small sound. I did not make a sound. You did. I spent 3 days trying to decide if I'd imagined it. I asked Leo and he said, I was too busy having my dignity publicly executed to notice. But I heard it, June. It was the building settling. The building is 800 years old. It has settled. It was you. She pressed her lips together, fighting a smile. I will neither confirm nor deny. 84 unnecessary days, June. She kissed him. It was the most efficient way to stop the rant, and also, she had wanted to do it for approximately 63 days and was tired of waiting. He made a small, surprised sound against her mouth, and then his arms tightened around her, and the garden and the fountain and the whole kingdom could have disappeared, and neither of them would have noticed. When they pulled apart, he was grinning so wide it looked like it hurt. Okay, I forgive you. But I'm telling Leo about day 5. Leo will be furious. Leo will add it to the ledger. He'll create a new column, near misses. He'll probably color-code it. She laughed, full, easy, real. The sound still surprised her sometimes, like finding a room in her own house she'd forgotten existed. But it was getting familiar. It was getting to feel like hers again. Arthur pulled her close, and they stood there in the garden while the stars came out and Prince Floofington chased moths in the jasmine bushes. Hey, June? What do you call a king who fell for his own bodyguard? Don't. Protected. She groaned into his chest, but she was smiling, and he could feel it. And that was enough. That was everything.